Welcome to NixOS Office Hours number 3. These video calls happen every other Friday at 3 p.m. American New York time, or 1900 UTC. They are recorded and live streamed on YouTube. These calls are covered by the Contributor Covenant Code of Conduct, and I'm glad you're here. Today we have Vincent Ambo, also known as Taj Jean, I believe. Vincent works at Google, and as part of some project there has created a Docker registry which automatically builds Docker images that you're able to pull based on Nix expressions that you pass in through the URL. Could you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your project?
Absolutely. Hi, I suppose people can see me. I see a camera light, so that's a good indicator. My name's Vincent, as Graham mentioned. I myself am actually not sure how to pronounce my username, but Tasjan or anything like that kind of works. I have a background in Haskell and other functional languages, dabbled a little bit in Erlang for a while, and I've been using Nix for about 3 years or so. For some of the time, I've been using it professionally at work, but not at the moment, except for this particular project that I'm going to be talking about now. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to do the hand-raising thing or also just talk over me. That's fine for me. And then we can probably get started.
Sounds good. One other note is that we are on the NixOS-Office Hours channel on Freenode, and I'm also watching there for people with questions. So if you're on the stream and you have questions, you can ask there, and somebody will, probably me, will relay them. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your project. It's called Nix-Suri, yeah?
Yes. If you don't mind, I'll start sharing my screen because I have a few slides that might help explain some of the concepts. And just let me know if that does not work. Here we go. Is this visible?
Visible.
Okay, yes. Perfect. Thank you very much. Cool. So I'm going to talk about Nix-Suri. Nix-Suri is my current, what we call 20% project, which means that I can spend some of my time at work doing something that is unrelated to my day-to-day job. And as a big fan of Nix and also a big fan of modern deployment infrastructures such as Kubernetes, I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the ways of kind of putting these two together. Graham, our host here, has written a blog post for which I've joked on IRC that I should have a shortcut for linking it on my machine, where he talked a little bit about Docker layers and container image layers. I'll be getting into that in a second. And that was one of the first things that kind of motivated me to start this project. I've already done the introduction, so I'm going to skip this slide. Yeah, imagine a world where we don't have to explicitly build images when we want to deploy them on Kubernetes or some other container management solution. Currently, the workflow that people are going through a lot of the time is something like you need to run a small tool, let's say stunnel in your cluster. So you go and you fetch an image like Alpine and you write a Docker file to pull from this image, install the tools you want, you push it to a registry, you copy the name of the image in the registry, you go into your cluster configuration, add it there, and so on. You've got a lot of steps that are sort of explicit and imperative and stateful because you're building an image that you have to store somewhere. And some of the time you really just want this tiny image that has one specific tool in it right now, and you don't want to have to go through a whole process. So the first idea I had originally, which was discussed a little bit at NixCon last year with a few of you, I think some of the people attending are actually also NixCon participants. You might have met me in real life. In this original idea, what I was thinking is that we could create a resource in Kubernetes clusters that users can define. You can see this, this little example here on the side. Is my cursor visible, by the way? Can I? Quick indication?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So the original idea was that a user could go and write a little bit of YAML configuration like this that defines contents which refer to keys in Nix packages. And there would be some sort of service running inside of the cluster that would watch for these definitions and pick them up and build them and publish the image to a registry. This was debated a little bit and we didn't really get anywhere, and I also never really got around to building a prototype for it. But then my motivation for this was reinvigorated after Graham's blog post about layers. So if you look at the way a traditional Docker file builds a container image, it's an imperative sequence of steps, meaning that we will have instructions that say things like from Debian, pulling Debian as the base image, run apt-get update, which starts actually executing that command, run apt-get install curl or bash or whatever you need in the image. And when Docker creates these layers, it basically takes the output of whatever command was run, and it gives it a hash, and it stores it in a sequence of layers that are going to be the final image that is distributed to users. The problem with this is that Docker has no concept of what the content of these layers actually is, because these are just a sequence of steps. You could, in theory, create a step in which you copy a directory into your image, and then you create a subsequent step where you overwrite a single file in this image. So now you've got a problem. You need to have these things in the correct order, and all sorts of other nonsense such as that. In the Nix world, we have figured out that things can be content addressable. Actually, for the Nix store, I guess that's work in progress, but in general, people in the community know what this is about. And Graham wrote this very interesting blog post where he pointed out that we can actually look at the file system of a container as something that maps pretty directly to Nix store paths. So if you had, for example, curl, which depends on libc and SSL certificates and various other derivations in Nix, you could take these, put them in individual layers with their individual store paths, and then the order no longer matters, because the only layer that is actually going to be variable is the one on top of that that assembles the actual environment. So if you build an image with curl, and then later on you build an image with curl and git, you would actually end up sharing a lot of the content of those two images. Graham wrote a very interesting algorithm to try and optimize the order in which the layers are assembled, not the order, but the content distribution across the different layers. If we have some time after the demo, I'll talk briefly about that, because we're also experimenting with some alternative ways of doing that are optimizing for the least amount of storage size transfer if you download multiple images, but we don't have to get into the details of that right now, unless somebody wants to, in which case just speak up. Cool. So the next step, when I actually started building a demo after my interest in this was reinvigorated, was to basically, I had built something that was capable of taking a YAML specification of some packages, looking them up in Nix packages, and then building a container image and serving it over HTTP. And what happened is that I was looking for an easy way of demoing this to people. And in the process of trying to develop this demo, I came up with the idea of what would actually happen if we didn't have to specify a resource in Kubernetes in advance. Which means that we disconnect from Kubernetes, which is nice because not everybody is using it. It might be overkill even for certain environments. And B, one of the other steps now is also gone. So we're down to one step. If you look at this slide here, you can see the name of a Docker image, and it's separated vaguely into 3 different parts, which I've colored. The first one is the URL pointing at the instance of the registry, Nix-Suri in this case. The second one, the first packages in this list are so-called meta packages. I'll get to that in a second. And then in the rest of the URL, you can see that every path component is basically its own tool. So the way that this works is that you ask Nix-Suri to provide you with an image, where in the first step, you're basically asking it for a JSON file called the manifest that describes which layers are in this image. And then Nix-Suri goes and it picks all the individual things out of the URL, and it fetches them from Nix packages and creates an image with the correct layer distribution and returns the manifest back to the user. And in addition, as a little piece of convenience, we've added this concept of meta packages such as shell. If you look in your local Nix packages, you won't actually see a package called shell. This is a package that expands to several packages. For example, Bash Interactive, Core Utils, Less, and some other tools that you might expect in a shell environment. So based on these specifications, we can actually pull in most of Nix packages. There are some minor things that we've run into over time. So the first one was that Docker images cannot contain uppercase characters in their paths. And it turns out that we have a few packages that have uppercase characters in them. So we've now managed to use a very simple method of rewriting all of the uppercase characters to lowercase and then seeing if there's a matching attribute set for them if the casing was different, which works for something like 99.9% of all the other ones, of all the uppercase packages in Nix packages. with some exceptions, which are packages that actually conflict in the casing, but we don't have to get into that. So yeah, this turns out to actually be a pretty useful abstraction. So I can do a quick demo of this, and then we can open for questions. And I can also talk a little bit if people are interested about a Kubernetes specific way of setting this up and how this could actually be used in a CI/CD flow.
Yeah, so I have a question right off the bat.
Go ahead.
So this shell meta package, one thing that people get surprised by often, I think, is that you need to include CA certs or core utils bash, but you need the secret bash, the interactive bash, not just regular bash, right? That's
exactly what that exists.
And so by including this shell meta package, you get one that's ready for interactive use, that you can curl stuff and it works like you would expect.
I would actually have to check if I included CA cert. That's a good point. If I didn't, that's a bug. We can fix that live. Actually, let's do that in 2 minutes when I go into the code. Yeah, so let's do a demo. Give me a second. Highly secure environments. So on this machine that I'm SSHing into, I've got a normal Docker setup. This little bar at the top might be in the way. Maybe if I just, yeah, here we go. So what I can do is I can run Docker like this. Docker run T means create a TTY, I means make it interactive, --rm, garbage collect the container after we're done. And now I can write something like Nix-Suri dev -shell. And if I run this, I have to actually also tell it what I want to run, which is bash. When I run this, I get a container. This one was already pre-fetched. You see that there was no download time or anything. But inside of this container, I've got basically no programs available. So if I try git, there's nothing here. If I try htub, not available. So I might now want to exit and think, what about htub and maybe ripgrep, which is a Rust implementation of grep that I'm a huge fan of. We can ask Nix-Suri to provide us an image with these instead. I've got all of these cached. So now if I type rg, then I've got ripgrep installed. If I try htub, then I see htub. I'm going to try to add one that isn't cached. What if we put git here at the end? Can I get another?
How about lolcat, lolcat?
lolcat. Right. So you can see now that Docker doesn't have this image locally. So it's now going to ask Nix-Suri for the manifest describing this image. What's happening on the backend, I can open the logs in a second, is that Nix-Suri will now map all of these to the packages and Nix packages, to the attribute names, and then it will build this image and then provide me with the manifest. As you can see, there is currently no way to feedback the build status. So while this is ongoing, there is a server running in the background that's actually executing a Nix build. But because Docker expects registries to have pre-created images, we don't really have a method in the API for feeding back information as that is going on. Now you can see some stuff happening. We're downloading a whole bunch of layers. And once this is done, we get a shell again. And now I should be able to type lolcat. Yeah, I should probably also actually feed something to it. Yeah, there we go.
So Vincent, we got a question on IRC.
Yes, go ahead.
What happens if you exit this container and swap rip grep and git?
If you do that, rip grep /git, what has to happen, so from Docker's perspective, these are two different images. So it will actually go and ask Nix-Suri for the image again, but Nix-Suri doesn't care about the order of these commands. So it will still be able to serve the same manifest back to the client, and the client will then download it. But you do have to go through that round trip. However, that's, as you could see, this was immediate. That's not a user visible thing. Did I actually flip them around? Let me try this again. Because Docker will figure out that it actually has all the layers. Yeah, now this will take a second, and then it should In fact, there's a bug that occasionally occurs where Docker is pulling layers again that it already has. I don't know why that happens. If there's somebody here who knows Docker internals very well, feel free to jump in on the issue for that. It would be nice to get that one ironed out. Yeah, that's exactly what's happened now. So if I were to take this list of layers and compare it, they would actually already be there, which is peculiar, but I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I should probably mention this is not yet production-ready software. You can feel free to experiment, but we haven't really tagged the version 1.0 yet. The plan is to do that reasonably soon, if possible before NixCon, because there will be an extended talk, hopefully, if my proposal gets accepted at NixCon. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
I believe yes. Florian is wondering if you also include IANA-Etsy in the shell list.
I don't think I do. Pull requests very welcome. The meta package definitions are currently part of the server code. So the server expands it before calling Nix, but I want to move this into Nix. So then it's going to become a little easier for all of us to actually modify that too. Yeah. So one question that I get a lot when demoing this to Nix people initially is, okay, so you're pulling random images from a Nix package set. Which package set? We have all the different NixOS channels. We've got NixOS Unstable. We've got 1903. We've got the upcoming 1909. We've got the older ones, and so on. Is there some way to specify which one you want? And the answer is yes, but it's at deploy time. So I can go to here's the Git repository, by the way, github.com/google/Nix-Suri, for those of you who haven't seen it. And there's a few environment variables that are supported for configuration. Specifically, these three let the user specify which of the package sets they want to use when they're building the images. So Nix-Suri channel is the easiest one, and this is actually the default. It defaults to 1903 at the moment, where we simply go and fetch that channel from GitHub and import it, and then off we go. Nix-Suri packages path is a local file system path. So if you have a Nix packages checkout somewhere locally and potentially something that is modifying that folder locally every now and then you could use this environment variable to specify that package set should be imported. And then the one that is probably most interesting, especially for kind of at work use cases, so to say, is the Nix-Suri packages repo. So Nix-Suri packages repo will configure Nix-Suri such that it will use the existing SSH configuration of your system to go and fetch a package repository from the path that has been specified, and it will map the tags at the end of the image to basically the branches or Git commits of the repository that you specified. And that's where things start to get a little more interesting. If people are interested, I can dig into the Kubernetes side of this, where we could use this for deployment. Yeah.
So I have a question before we get to that. So I see it's not passing a Nix packages package set. It's just passing a package set. Could I deploy Nix-Suri somewhere and give it a completely different package set that is my own internal services?
That's what I'm going to demo.
Excellent. Let's see it.
Yeah. So there's one caveat. Your package set must either be an overlay over the existing package set, or it must be some other method that you've come up with to actually put to create a superset of the package set. This is because Nix-Suri needs some of the functions from lib, and I didn't want to put them into the Nix-Suri repository. So you need to have the actual package set somewhere under the hood, but you can overlay your own services. I will demo this briefly. So people who know me might know that I'm a monorepo proponent, and I have my personal infrastructure in a monorepo. And I've created a little reduced version of this for demo purposes that looks roughly like this. I should probably some space here. Okay, here we go. So this is the default Nix. Is the font size okay? Is this readable?
If you could increase it by a couple points.
Yeah, I'll try. That's probably about as much as I can fit on screen. Here we go. Basically, the way this is currently set up is that I create an overlay function. This is standard Nix packages overlays that overlays my local projects into the package set. It's imported down here, overlays local packages. So if I go into the folder in which I have this repository, then I can actually still get all the normal things I would expect to be able to get from Nix. Let me just put a few spaces here again. Nix build-a Git, for example. Oh, just dot. Can leave it out. Then I get the normal Git, which is part of the normal package set. But I can also, you can see that my blog service is defined in here, which is a Haskell service. I can type this, and it will instead go and build my blog. So it's overlaid on top of the same package set. Now what I've done is I have pushed this package repository into a cloud source repository that's on Google Cloud Platform. You've got the ability to host private Git repositories, and I thought there would be a fitting kind of integration for this. So I have a remote here. Zoom in again a little bit, which is the package repository hosted on my private sort of not publicly accessible thing. This might also, in the case of a different company, be a GitLab instance or a Gerrit instance or some other form of repository hosting solution. And I just push my package set over there. Now what I can start doing is, if I demonstrate my Kubernetes cluster briefly, let me just make sure that there are no pods in here at the moment. Okay. Yeah. So what I can do inside of my Kubernetes clusters, I can deploy a Nix-Suri instance into the cluster. And then I can do a little trick where I create a cluster internal load balancer, which gives me an IP address that is reachable from anywhere inside of this cluster. And now comes the hack. I can create a private DNS zone, which is a feature that most cloud providers have, that I can attach to this network, and I can call it local and create an entry in here for, is this visible? Here we go. Almost. For Nix-Suri.local pointing at the address of this load balancer. So what essentially happens is that I can specify Docker images instead of Nix-Suri.dev, which is the public instance. I can write Nix-Suri.local/shell and so on. But I can specify the packages from my own package set in here. So I can, for example, do this command here, which is just going to give me the normal shell image that we used before. So you can see that this is very similar to the command we used with Docker itself, but instead of running against the local container daemon, we're now running against the Kubernetes cluster. And I've got a shell environment again. There's no Git, there's no htop. I can go out and start doing the same things where I add, for example, Git. I have to delete the pod again first, though. I can add, for example, Git into this image. And now the same process happens again in the back. I can actually show the logs this time, which might be interesting to see. Kube public. Yeah. So here's what happens inside of Nix-Suri under the hood. An image is requested for a certain tag. Latest is the default tag in Docker if you don't specify a tag. And latest is translated by Nix-Suri to master if there is a backend Git repository. So presumably most setups use master as the primary mainline branch, but that's also configurable. And then what happens is that it builds the layers and it uploads them into Google Cloud Storage, which is slightly more scalable for distributing the layers than it would be to serve them directly from this instance. And then when Docker actually requests the layers, it sends the Docker client on. It actually follows redirects to the storage bucket instead. And now we can see the layers have been downloaded, and I got a new prompt up here. Now if I run Git, I've got Git available. But now for the final demo, and I hope I get the attribute set name right, I can specify, after deleting the pod again, I can specify the package for my blog, which is inside of the package set. And now if I start this, I actually get my blog instance. And I could probably create a second shell and just curl that. I just don't remember on which port it starts. Might be, oh, I don't have curl. Well, you get the idea. This is now actually serving my blog, and the blog is imported in my private package set over here. Just for the purpose of this demo, I had renamed the package to task blog instead of taskgen.blog, but you can also nest them. The periods are actually supported in image names. And then I can get the deployment infrastructure straight through this way. Now, the interesting thing that starts happening is that I can, in theory, specify a branch or tag or git commit here. So I can write test blog master. And if I do this, Nix-Suri is going to build the image, and it's going to specifically fetch the branch or otherwise tag, commit, whatever that I've specified. This means that it would feasibly be possible to have a package set where you've got a branch for testing, development of various features, and you can ask the Kubernetes cluster to fetch a specific build of a service at a specific tag or commit. So you could build all sorts of interesting CI pipelines out of this, which is something that I'm experimenting with at the moment.
This is really interesting. So we're running out of time here for this part of the.
Yep, I think that was it from my side also.
Cool. So I don't see any standing questions, but I have a few left over.
Cool.
First, so this is being developed at github.com/Google/Nix-Suri. What does Google have to do with this?
I'm an employee of Google, and it's the easiest way for me to get something published is to do it officially through the organization, which is what I did. And it also means that we've got some amount of brain power internally that is looking at this project because people are interested in it. I should specify explicitly that this is not an officially supported Google project, which means that if you, for example, use the official, rather public instance at nixsuri.dev, which you can experiment with all you want, I make no uptime or SLO guarantees. And if it eats your cluster or whatever, you can't sue me. That's the basic idea.
That sounds pretty good. So my next question is, I felt pretty proud of myself for coming up with the layered image building, but I feel like it's a special spark of brilliance to go from being able to build these layered images to being able to build these images just based on a URL. Can you tell me how you made that jump, or what happened to get you to this idea?
It was actually, I briefly mentioned this, I think, I wanted to make a flashy demo. So I already had a system that could do this based on the resource descriptions inside of Kubernetes. And I tried to show this to people, and I ended up like writing YAML and getting the syntax wrong and trying to update it in the cluster and then hoping that the whole reconciliation loop and push thing works out and so on. And then I thought, wait a second, I can actually just implement this registry protocol because it's basically 2 GET requests. It's not that complicated. And the original idea was just to do this for the demo. I can put the packages in the URL. So it kind of just came up along the way. And then after showing that to people, they ended up being way more interested in that than the original idea of having Kubernetes resources, because this is in some ways more flexible. And especially in cases where you want to quickly launch one particular image with a tool, which happens to me all the time, this is quite useful. So the original idea with having the Kubernetes resources is kind of dead in the water at this point. I don't think it actually has any benefits over this one. Yeah, and that's how we ended up here.
That's really great. I really like it a lot. I could, I've sort of wanted something similar to this for how I manage my, a lot of the NixOS build infrastructure using NetBoot. But I sort of wanted to be able to just pull the image and have it build or not build as needed.
Oh, I can share an idea with you that I came up with a colleague the other night. So we were brainstorming other ways of serving these packages. And as some of you might know, if you look into NixOS system config, where the build primitives sit, we've got not just the ability to build container images, we can also build QEMU images and NetBoot images and all sorts of things. So we vaguely experimented with the idea of serving a NetBoot image that contains a custom grub. And now the interesting thing is that grub can chain load additional NetBoot things over HTTP. And you could build an interactive grub menu where people select Nix packages and architectures and so on, and then are served a NetBoot image with that Nix system. There's a few more of those that we've experimented with. I think there's a lot of potential here for Nix in general.
That is very interesting. Another interesting thing is, I think Squash FSs or maybe CPIO files, you can just keep adding more on at the end. So you could pre-create this format and then just keep serving one per store path.
Yeah, that's
until you've put it together. Well, very cool. So any other questions from the audience? If we don't have any more questions, we can move on to discussing some pull requests.
right.
I suspect we might have some interesting ones, especially since Ilko is here today. All right, no further questions. Well, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating, Vincent. Thank you for coming and talking about it today.
Sure, you're welcome.
So I have one pull request here. I can't unfortunately bring it up, but it is indeed good that Ilko is here. Hopefully his microphone works so that he can talk. But it's from World of Peace, and it's about the ISOs that are published on the website for people to download. Would you like to introduce that World of Peace?
Yeah, so I've been thinking that we should have distribute a GNOME 3 ISO for a while now, actually. And I think I noticed looking at the history on GitHub that it was an idea that happened in the past that really didn't go through. So I'm trying to sort of revive that so we can actually have that.
So what does in your mind, what does it why should we have this extra ISO? Why isn't having just Plasma sufficient?
Okay, so my main rationale is that, Plasma 5 and GNOME 3 are the de facto desktop environments for most desktop users. So it's actually an insufficiency to not distribute an ISO for those users because there's so many of them. And I'm not sure if a GNOME 3 user, for example, were trying to install NixOS offline, I don't think they would have a great time achieving that with the Plasma 5 ISO.
I see. And Ilko, are you actually able to talk?
I could try. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep,
yeah.
we hear you.
Hey, great.
Excellent.
Hi, Ilko.
We don't have video.
No.
Not sure if that's on purpose or not.
Yeah, that's on purpose.
All right, so it's okay. So it sounds, looking at the pull request, actually, can somebody mention the pull request number? I don't have it up in front of me. Maybe somebody will get that in a minute. So
it's 66640.
Thank you. Yeah, so Ilko, what's your concerns around 66640 and adding this ISO?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So one is sort of a UX issue. So it complicates our download page if we offer even more options. So users already have to choose between a graphical and a minimal ISO. And so if we offer multiple graphical ISOs, then they have to start wondering, well, which one is the best? Perhaps some of them will be better tested than others, and some of them might end up bit rotting. So I think it's better to have one well-tested ISO than multiple that, might all be not so good. So, for example, if you go to the Ubuntu download page, you click on download, you just get one ISO. You don't have to think about it. Well, you have to decide whether you want the desktop or the server ISO. But so the other issue is, so these ISOs are pretty big, so they add some overhead to the build process, and they have to be done for every commit to Nix packages. So unlike most packages in Nix packages, which only are rebuilt if they actually change, these ISOs have Nix packages itself as an input, so they get rebuilt on every commit. So it's not entirely trivial amount of overhead, and it's blocker for the channel generation script. So it slows down channel updates even further.
So yeah, all those are valid points that need to be addressed. I was actually a little confused by what you meant by testing in particular. I'm not sure if there's like tests for for install happening in the graphical ISO, or is it just install tests in general, or is it tests for GNOME 3? Because I would say that GNOME 3 is very well tested. We have several active maintainers, and we have 2 tests currently.
Right, but you probably do need to test before you make a NixOS release whether things like wireless support still works in GNOME. So whether network manager still properly works in some GNOME applet. So that's sort of thing that has a lot of moving parts, and I don't know if we have any automated tests for it, but
I don't think we have automated tests for that for Plasma 5 either.
yeah, exactly. So if you add multiple ISOs, then you basically double the test matrix.
Yes, that is true.
So we have Thomas here, whose last name is, I believe, Tugel. Tugel. Thank you.
I thought it was Tugel.
Thomas maintains Plasma in Nix packages. What are you thinking?
I understand Elko's concerns about the infrastructure, but I'm not really involved enough in that to have any intelligent comment. But yeah, as far as testing of the installer, well, as far as testing the install process, I think that's going to be very similar between the ISOs. The main concern is about testing the graphical environment, and I don't think that there's very deep automated testing of Plasma 5 or of GNOME at the moment.
Yeah, it's just like if a terminal pops up currently, I think.
Yeah.
And if it gets to the greeter.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if it auto logins through the greeter currently.
Yeah.
So that's actually an issue for Plasma 5 too, is that it's not really well automated tested for the installer. So it's like quite a lot of overhead to manually test both of these ISOs if we were going to have them.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, it's currently something that the release manager needs to do.
Yeah.
Sometime during the stabilization phase, and then hope that it doesn't break afterwards.
Right. So I did some quick looking. For as long as I've been tracking NixOS Unstable, we've had, oops, I actually counted small. Let me look at NixOS Unstable. Yeah, so as long as I've been tracking the channel update, we've had several hundred bumps. And each ISO is roughly a gigabyte, so that would translate to several hundred gigabytes of ISOs that we're keeping around. I'm not saying that either way. Oops, not saying that's a good or a bad thing either way. It just is a byproduct of how our builds and releases work.
Should we?
Well, go ahead.
I wondered if it's necessary. ISOs are a little bit different than other packages in that it's less likely that we need to keep old versions around in cache. Is there a way we can invalidate the cache and delete some of those old ones more rapidly?
Especially for old releases?
Yes.
Yeah, so currently there is no garbage collection of the cache whatsoever. So basically we have all of Hydra's builds from the last X years. I don't know exactly how long back, but yeah, that's because company Infor is paying for the S3 storage costs. So I'm very grateful for that. But at some point that might stop, and so then we'll have to start garbage collecting.
So that's a possible, the solution for the file size buildup.
Yeah, and we used to garbage collect before we moved the binary cache to S3.
I think
All right.
another point you had was you didn't want to open the floodgates for an ISO for every single desktop environment.
Right, because then, yeah, so basically, yeah, what's the criterion for adding new ISOs to the to our release? So if somebody comes with an XFCE ISO, what do we say?
I would say it'd have to be well tested and well maintained, and have users.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty soft and hairy criteria. I think there possibly should be other criteria along commitments along being part of the release process, demonstrated parts of commitment to keeping it up to date and testing, and possibly even having an idea of quantity of users, but that's not really a question that we can answer right now.
Yeah, although you can say that GNOME and Plasma are the main desktop environments, and XFCE isn't. So.
So one problem that has been brought up is maybe there's a way that we can communicate that we do support GNOME as well as Plasma, and I wonder if that would help ease the pain, but without actually.
I'm mostly thinking, how can an install experience be most convenient for someone, especially if you're trying to do it offline for those graphical environments, and it's not going to be convenient without having an actual ISO with all those things on it.
Yeah, fair enough.
I wonder how big a combined Plasma GNOME ISO would be, where you
I was thinking that too, because I'm pretty sure OpenSUSE distributes like a enormous graphical DVD, but it's like 4 gigabytes. But that would make it really wouldn't make like the technical overhead you're talking about less. It would just be the same. It would just be combined.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, at least it would be smaller because of the commonality.
Mm-hmm. I think I did say that the current size of the GNOME ISO is 1.5 gigabytes. And that's without like optimizations. Their defaults aren't currently great or the same as they should be upstream.
All right. Well, we are actually running out of time here. We're in the last few seconds so that we have allotted for this stream. I wonder if we ought to set up a second call just to discuss this ticket and discuss that sort of criteria, or even dedicate a whole 15, 20-minute segment to it in the future. Does anybody else have some final comments they would like to work in before I close?
Don't forget that the images are not only in the cache, but on a S3 bucket for the website, so it's 2 times the size.
That's right. Thank you, Samuel.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming to the third NixOS office hours. The next one will be 2 weeks from today. This will be published on the NixOS Foundation YouTube channel, which is available. I'll post that in the NixOS office hours and also in a couple weeks. NixCon is coming up in Brno. I am just pulling that up because I forgot the actual dates. October 25th through the 27th. Tickets are for sale now at nixcon.org, where I hope to see more talks from Vincent on Nix-Suri, as well as your talk about something you're doing with Nix in production or just something interesting you've done with Nix. And again, thank you so much, Vincent, for coming and talking about Nix-Suri today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
thank you all. See you later.
Bye.